Thanks everybody for tuning in. This is Natalie Stillwell from SoGoesTheFuture.com. I am interviewing Steve Pokorny today, and I'm very excited. He just released a book. It's called Redeemed Vision, and he's also a freedom coach. Steve, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself and let everyone know what a freedom coach is before we start talking about your book.
Well, first off, Natalie, thank you very much for the opportunity to come here and share today. And I come from a background, actually, many of your viewers on this, I come from a broken family experience. I think a lot of us have that experience. And my dad was out of the picture by the time I was 5, growing up with a single mom. And both my parents actually passed away when I was in high school. And so that experience of loss tremendously impacted me. God's has righted that ship. I'm married now. I have 2 children on earth, 1 in heaven, and it's a blessing. Nothing's perfect. As we know, there's always struggles in marriage and family life, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. And where the impact and where freedom coaching began was from I got into pornography when I was very young, and that shaped and impacted me for a long, long time. By the grace of God, there was healing and freedom. And so now I go on to mentor people, men and women, in how do you become free permanently, and how do we transform those desires so that we no longer desire them. And this is a huge, huge hope for a lot of people who think this is my life, that this is the way things will be for the rest of my life. And this is how I was. But by the grace of God, I was set free. And I believe it's my lifelong penance, shall we say, to help serve the church and serve those who are in bondage, to bring them lasting freedom so they can be liberators themselves of others.
That's so wonderful and so important. I'll even just add in a little personal anecdote here. I mean, I was 5 when I remember seeing pornography. A relative watched it in front of me and some of my cousins, and it really it warped my understanding of my body and sexuality and what it meant to be an adult and adult behaviors. And as I grew older too, I found myself seeking, pornography and developing an addiction. I remember that in high school at some point, as I was becoming more interested in Christian faith, that I had a sort of revelation that there's a more beautiful vision that we can have about our sexuality and marriage and relationships between men and women and with our own body. And I felt like that was really the missing piece. It was just, I needed to see the more beautiful vision that was possible. And God gave me grace to see that, to begin seeing his plan and his intention. So that brings us to the title of your book, Redeemed Vision. And what is the subtitle?
Sure. So the book is Redeemed Vision, Setting the Blind Free from the Pornified Culture. And so the project is a twofold project. And one part is that in which to give a practical game plan to those who are experiencing what is called, I call it a compulsion. And I'm going to come back to that term in a little bit, who experience a compulsion to pornified images, so to lust, to break that attraction. And in fact, to transform that attraction to what will actually satisfy us, because we can try to take created things as much as possible and try to fill up this hole in our heart. But because we're made for the infinite, until we start desiring the infinite things, we're going to be unsatisfied. And that's why there's a lot of pain and a lot of hurt there. So to actually provide a game plan, how do we actually solve the problem? Because most of the things that are out there that are offered, that are well-intentioned, are mere coping mechanisms. And if anybody knows about coping mechanisms, they're good advice, but they don't actually solve the problem, because the problem here is a heart and a vision issue. And the fact is, if we want to have our vision transformed, we got to have our heart transformed. And our heart is not going to be transformed unless we come to experience the truth and learn the truth and live in the truth. So that'd be the first part. And obviously there's a ton to unpack there. The second purpose is to challenge the culture, specifically the Catholic culture, to question the foundations from which we view the body. I mean, like yourself, Natalie, so many of us can experience and identify our own experience of shame with our body and the human body in general, and a lot of, especially for women, starting from our earliest experiences in childhood. And like the average age of exposure to pornography is between 8 and 11 years of age. I know some who have been in counseling at 6 years of age, and with the fact that this is proliferating into everything, our movies, our magazines, our television shows, into our cartoons. There's innuendos, and we think this is normal. And I would propose that most of us have been programmed to see the body through the lens of shame and suspicion, and ultimately through the lens of lust. And we assume this is the only way to view the body. There's a fear, a deep fear of the body, because a lot of us have tasted the bitter fruit of lust, and then we equate the body or sexuality or nakedness with lust, or even attraction with lust or desire. And we've got to say, no, the body is good, nakedness is holy, but how are we viewing that? And our culture, and specifically the Christian culture, accepts this in many times as the status quo. And this is the root why Christian men, and increasingly a number of women, think it's inevitable that they're going to struggle with an attraction to pornified images for the rest. I challenge that foundation and say very clearly to the entire church, right, Christian and Catholic, beyond, that Christ can redeem our vision, that his redemption goes to the very depth and root of who we are, to our sexuality, of how we see ourselves and how we relate with how we see others. And this is what can heal the wounds that often happen between men and women. And if we don't, then we're going to see the world we live in go even to a darker place, that friendship, just genuine friendship between men and women, becomes near impossible.
How come pornographic images and thinking are so attractive and addicting? How has this become so widespread for us?
Sure. So first off, I want to touch on that notion of addiction. Okay, in my book, specifically in chapter 3, and there's some research that backs this up, that I think the more appropriate terminology you want to say is compulsion. And the reason for that is, when we talk about the term addiction, there's a lot of underlying notions that once hooked, always hooked. Okay. And when we talk about compulsion, yes, it's serious. Yes, it is something that has to be dealt with. There's healing there, but in no way is this something the way it has to be the rest of my life. I and many, many others have found freedom, and lasting freedom, internal freedom, where we're in the image of a pornified image, and we're not drawn to lust, but in fact, it's sadness of the great gift of the person there is being degraded there. So why is there such a shall we say, an attachment, a potential for attachment? Well, we're like anything that God creates, the evil one can take and can twist, right? And can go and take what is this beautiful gift of the attraction. The body is created for attraction. It's created to bring us into union with others, ultimately into union with God. And because of this, right, if God's great plan is for union and communion, well, the evil one hates God and hates everything that's about God. So he's going to take anything and try to destroy that. So this great gift of our sexuality, to make a gift of ourselves, gets twisted so that we're focused on ourselves, and we're focused on not on how I can serve and love the other person and see them as a person, and through this loving gaze create bonds of communion with them, but instead, how can I go and take from them and ultimately just view them as less than a person, view them almost to the level of an object. And I say almost to the level of an object, as John Paul the Great would talk about, is because that person can never lose their dignity. And I think that's a great hope that we've got to hold out to, that no matter how bad the situation has been, if we've been exposed to pornography or been mistreated, God forbid somebody's experienced rape, bad experiences with our sexuality, all of those things, God can come in and can heal if we allow that to happen. And so that attraction is good, But we've got to live that attraction in an appropriate way, in a way that is life-giving. And I think this is what, especially for young people, one piece of advice I would give is before we get into an experience with or in a situation with a member of the opposite sex, it's check your heart at the door. Don't leave your heart at the door, but check it. What's going on in our heart there? And if there's a movement towards, I feel like I want to use this person, well, then this is where we need to not stop at that desire, but to push through to, God, help me to learn how to love this person in front of me. And I think this is a very different perspective because we typically are told, avert your eyes, run away from that. That feeling is bad. And we want to say, no, there's something good in there, but we've got to take away and filter through the lies to get to the truth.
There's that expression that women give sex to get love. And I would say, the pornified vision for me growing up was sort of that. It was this idea that I have to be sexually attractive. I have to attract men on that level in order for anyone to ever give me intimacy. And in my home, there wasn't a lot of affection. So, once I hit puberty, I thought, well, okay, the only safe place to have intimacy and affection and affirmation is going to be in a relationship with a man, and that it would probably have to involve some degree of sexual involvement because that's what matters. But I know now, of course, I really just wanted the intimacy, and that was the cheap, easy thing that was presented to me early on and really took root in my heart. Would you agree with that? And also, like, for the man, what is his experience? How does he, what's the deep need underlying, maybe his addiction to a pornified view?
Sure. And first off, Natalie, thank you for sharing your story. And from this half of humanity, just ask for your forgiveness, because that's not the way that was meant to be. And for anybody especially women who's hearing this and hearing our little discussion today, right? I ask your forgiveness. Pray for us. We don't, as Jesus says, we don't know what we do. Those wounds go so deep, and I think this is where a lot of the hatred of men towards from women comes because men have failed in their job to see women as persons and to love them as persons. And so I would say there is something to that fact of, women will use sex to get love. And it is that deep intimacy there. And in fact, like, a woman doesn't want to be seen as sexy. In her heart of hearts, there is something want to be seen as desirable, but it is that desire to be like all of us, to be seen as unique and unrepeatable. Right? It's the deepest part. Like when a woman goes to a party and another woman shows up wearing the exact same dress, it's mortifying, right? Why is that? It's because it feels like something's being stolen there, right? And I hope there's not any ill will between those women, but there is something who said that. And so her heart, the root of her heart, her desire is not about wanting to be sexy, but to be loved. A deep desire to be loved, to be seen as unrepeatable, and to be able to enter into union there. And so when a lot of women talk about the most intimate relationship between the husband and wife, right? In that action, it's not about, as the world would use the term orgasm. And for a lot of women, it has nothing to do with it. It's about being with that person. For men, on the other hand, right, there is a deep desire for respect. But I would also say, we want to say also, because I think there's a mistaken notion. I think this is also where we've got to bring this out into the Christian culture, is there's that mistaken notion that men are visual. Well, women are visual also. Okay. And many times, and the fact is this idea that women are to blame for men lusting. And no, a man first needs to take responsibility for that. And so a man, I love the terminology. Sam Guzman of the Catholic Gentleman, if anybody's seen that blog, one of the definitions he gives for masculinity is the arduous struggle for the truth. It's arduous struggle for the good. That's what it is. And I think we want something to strive for. We want something that is noble and good. We do. But in many cases in our culture, in the world in which we live, and it's not even a culture, it's an anti-culture. It's not something that brings life, but brings death, and doesn't provide the opportunity for men to step to the level. And I don't want to put this all on women. I mean, women do have their part to play, but let's be very real. The first responsibility is for men to take control of their hearts. And if we find disorder there, to give that disorder to Christ to redeem it. And a lot of Christian men put the blame on women, saying, it's her fault that she's dressed that way, and I should just get off the hook there, and I can look at her any which way. And pornography is radically accessible. So you know what? I'm not getting it from my wife, so I'm going to go here. Or I can't find a girlfriend, so I'm going to go here. And in fact, this is so easy. Why pursue women at all? And I think this is obviously messing up the entire relationship between men and women. And so men need to realize their great calling is not to use women, but to serve them. And how they can lay down their lives for them is by first dying to their own false desires. And their false desires that we don't want to use. We do want to love. We want to serve, and to remember that we're called to this. We're called to this with power and efficacy because the Holy Spirit does. And so very simply, let's make this, take something very practical. When a man sees a woman, right, and perhaps there's a tinge of lust, what does he need to do? He needs to see her as a person, take her fully in, see her not with lust, but look with love. And in that gaze, to make her real, give her a name, give her a story, even if he never meets her, he never has a conversation with her, make her real. And then from that, pray, because this is the greatest power that we have. And in doing that, God can take over and move the heart there. And then from that perspective, keep our eyes moving, right? Women are beautiful, and but there's also lots of other beautiful things in the world. And no, I'm not calling any women a thing. So I think this is a very important aspect here.
And it reminds me, John Paul II has a statement that I've heard often. One of the problems with pornography is not that it shows too much, but that it shows too little, because it reduces the person, and you don't see their name and their family and their desires and all the other realities of who they are, or even their entire body in one image, And I wanted to also mention, as you were talking about the struggle for men, I remember hearing Christopher West talk about how for him it was really powerful to realize that the ideal man that he wants to emulate isn't the man in the pornified vision. It's actually Jesus on the cross. Like, how much more manly and self-possessed and able to give sacrificially in love can you get? Would you agree? And do you think that's a helpful thing for a man to keep in mind in his redeeming his vision?
If I don't agree with it, then I better end in my Catholic man card, because the fullness of our life as Catholics is to emulate Jesus Christ. But I think to build upon that notion is Christ is the bridegroom. The whole story of Scripture from beginning to end, and which is it encapsulates all of reality, is about a wedding. It's a marriage that's gone bad. And so Christ, the bridegroom, has come to redeem his bride, to bring them home. And so we as men, and this is where we bear an even greater responsibility in some sense than women do, because we have to be Christ. No pressure, buddies. And if we don't, then we're going to be held accountable for that, right? And it's not to say that women don't have their role or don't have, their mission in life, but that is our mission. And when we don't live up to that, I think this is why women, if you look at the nature of our bodies, a man's body is both exteriorly, a woman's body is both interiorly. And when a man doesn't give a sincere gift of self, a woman feels this even more deeply than a man in receiving a woman's lust, perhaps, because yes, women can lust. From this, because she's receiving this interiorly, she's expecting and she's deserving a sincere gift of self. And when something's in there that's not truth and love, it goes to the core of who she is. Right? And so, yes, take the issue of being in marriage. Like I work with a lot of people who come to me for freedom coaching are on their last straw with their marriage. And it's heartbreaking to me, because I see the wounds. And so part of that conversation is, helping these guys, and they are gentlemen, they just maybe haven't been living it for a long, long time, to realize that you've taken your eye off the ball. The beauty that on the day of your wedding that was ravishing, that you maybe cried by the altar, that you've lost that sense. You've lost that love and feeling, shall we say, but even more, you've lost that sense of what true love is. And so the perspective is, this is the one that's been given to me by God to lay down my life for her. And that I first and foremost must die to my own fallen desire. And that's a daily battle. And that's the other thing to say this, that once we get past lust, and yes, we can get past lust in the sense that this is something that's no longer, that's overwhelming my life, but I put it in my rearview mirror. Then there's other things that I have to work through. Like Jesus says, take the plank out of your eye so you can work on the little specks. And just ask my wife, lust is not the issue in our marriage, but my own selfishness is still here. There's things that I have to work through. And so it's a clarion call that we unite ourselves, our struggles, to Christ, as Colossians 1:24 says, we make up what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. Christ has done everything for us on the cross, but there's one thing he doesn't have, and that's our sufferings. And if we would give that to him, he would redeem it and make glory shine from it.
So what, in a nutshell, if you will, is a redeemed vision? Like, where is this end goal that you will be taking your readers?
Sure. Redeemed vision is where we get to a place, and it is really possible here on earth. That's the thing that we want to say. This is not to ignore that original sin is real. We know that baptism wipes out original sin, and then concupiscence is left behind, right? The tendency to be selfish, right? We will have concupiscence, but in this life, right, as Veritatis 103 states very clearly, that we have the ability through grace, it's not by our own willpower, but by grace, to overcome and not be dominated by concupiscence. We may feel a little pull here, but it is when we're in the presence of another person. And I think it's twofold, right? On one hand, if I'm in the presence of somebody that I find attractive, that I find beautiful, somebody who's not my wife or even my wife, right? I could be, in my fallen desires, to look at her and see her as an object and use her as an object, but to see all persons that attract me as persons, and to speak to them as persons, and to treat them as persons. And this is something that men especially are capable of, okay? But then the flip side is, what about those who don't look like the bodies in pornography or pornified images, right? The ones that are trying to be thin, large breasts, tight rear ends, those things, the way in which, even that way, and I apologize for my language there, using some of that, of the culture there, but see how even in that language, we are objectifying and looking at the different body parts. We need to see the whole person. But what about the persons that, for instance, don't have those body types? Does that mean they're any less of a person, that they're any less of worthy of my attention and my respect? No. And so it's about getting us to a place where we integrate those desires. We feel impelled to want to serve them every day. And in the moments of when we see brokenness, when we see people not living, not acting in the way that's in accord with their dignity, we're not moved to this lust, but we're moved to this sadness, to this desire to almost weep because such greatness has been trounced underfoot. And then to take that, all that there, and offer that in grace to the Father, so that if we're grateful and we're seeing a beautiful person, we thank God for it. If we see a person who is not being treated well, we feel empathy for them, and then we're able to relate to them as a person. And then from there, regardless of who they are, regardless of how much or how little clothing they're wearing, we treat them as persons, we see them as persons, and we interact and work to form friendships with them. And this is really genuinely possible. And in doing this, we first start this in our own marriage, in our own families. I mean, if we're not married, that's fine. But in our own circles of influences, right? And from there, that's how we start to rebuild the human community.
So what I'm hearing is the redeemed vision in many ways is just really having an awe for the whole person every time you encounter any person, just a reverence and a respect, and just seeing the miracle and the beauty of that person's entire being. Is that fair?
That is very fair. And in fact, I give readers or listeners and viewers one reflection. Go look up on YouTube Chris Medina. I use this in my presentations all the time. It's way back from 2009, American Idol. This is a man who was engaged. His fiance was in a a tragic accident. At the time of that video, she was in a wheelchair and she was severely incapacitated. And Chris was still with her. And I think to this day, even now, is still with her, okay? They're not married. And he sees the value of who she is as a person. And I show this in audiences in so many places. And there's weeping going on. And why? Because we long for it. Men will weep because they long to be able to see women this way and treat them this way. Women are weeping because they desire to be wooed and loved, no matter their sex appeal or lack thereof, no matter what they can do or lack thereof, just being loved for who they are. And yes, absolutely, Natalie, it is that ability to have awe and reverence for the beauty. And I have to make that very clear, the beauty and to a rediscovery of beauty, the beauty of the person who ultimately is a living revelation of the mystery of God, of what we are longing for in the beatific vision, the most beautiful vision, who is seeing God face to face. And if we say yes to the marriage invitation of the Lamb in eternity, this is what we are going to see in all people who are united in heaven with our bridegroom. And
also what I'm hearing too is true intimacy. I mean, really going deep and connecting. And like you said, that's what will be in heaven. It's all about the communion with each other and with our Father and Trinity.
Yes, yes. And even take that phrase, Natalie, like intimacy. And we've heard it that break that in that word, the phrase "into me see," right? The four deepest desires of the human heart are to see and be seen, to love and be loved. We want somebody to see us for who we are, to love us for who we are, and then also to reciprocate. We long, and think for any woman out there, right? And guys to a degree as well. You want to be seen for who you are, not for body parts or anything like that, and to make it very clear that we as men are not just capable of this, but we are called to it. It's the fulfillment. It's the greatness of our masculinity to not just go to serve one woman, but to serve all women. Obviously, appropriate boundaries and appropriate relationships understood there, but that it doesn't matter what the relationship status is, or whether it's romantic or not, that all persons, all women, I am called to serve, and vice versa. All women are to appropriately serve men. And this is one of the key phrases that John Paul uses in Theology of the Body is all of history, in its latitude and longitude, is made up of this question of who is man for woman and who woman will be for man. And until we answer that, and it must start by having our vision and our hearts transformed, there cannot be a movement to what we all want, which is genuine peace. But if we can learn to do this through grace and live this vision, anything is possible.
So for the parent himself or herself, what are one or two practical things you can recommend to help us move towards that redeemed vision, get away from the shame and the pornified vision, just for us as parents?
Sure. So let's start with how we understand the body, okay? And I would say with a couple notions on that. First, it's how are we speaking about the body? Right? Think about your own body, right? Are there things about your body you feel shameful for? And we see this more about in women than men speaking about that. But is there a fear of revealing your body? And I'm talking about in your own home, right? Your own privacy, your own home. Say you're getting out of the shower, right? And your children come walking in. What's our reaction? Right? Are we hiding? Right? And they're just being themselves, right? They're just being little kids. Or is it, hey, how are you? How can I help you? Having that conversation right there, right? There's this being completely open and vulnerable there in our body, but also, and how are we speaking about our body? Are we talking about different parts of our body that we feel are less worthy of attention or less worthy of value? Because we use the notion of liposuction or breast enhancements or even that dress just wouldn't look right on me. Because I was showing off a wrong thing. Well, a lot of that language sinks into the deep conscious, especially of young girls. And you can probably speak greatly about this, Natalie, on some level. And that's why, like in the book, I don't go into talk about women's clothing. My wife's like, that's a book for somebody else to write, and I'm like, okay, I will acquiesce to that. So I'd say in that first one, another simple way I would say is get them. Second would be you need to start educating in beauty. What is beauty? How do we see beauty? I mean, Thomas Aquinas in chapter 10 of my book goes pretty heavily into what is beauty and how can we tell the difference between what is real beauty and what is a counterfeit of beauty. And remember, it is only real beauty that is going to satisfy us. And third is with technology. Right now, Natalie, we are using technology. Technology is a good. We have to remember that. And there is a goodness to it. It's supposed to bring us together. But the problem is, many cases we're not using it as a good, and it's making us to not, to quote a sister I know, Sister Timothy Prokes, who wrote somewhat on theology of the body, said we've traded real presence for virtual absence. And so much of the stuff we're doing is online. So much times kids are playing on video games, which can be a gateway to pornography, or they're doing a lot of things that on social media where they're not respecting the truth of the person. They're not respecting the value of who that person is. And so we want to get kids, and again, it's not wrong for them to be online appropriately or to use social media where it's going to help them bond, to form real relationships. But we need to be aware of their technological habits. We want to know their passwords. We want to know, who are their friends there. And it's not a matter of stalking them, but it is being very aware of that, but also spending time outside, doing things in the real world. Like one simple action that can be for especially for younger kids and maybe slightly older kids is get clay, get Play-Doh, have them be working in art, right? If my youngest daughter loves drawing, so we provide lots of paper and pencils, and God willing, she's not drawing on the stairs or anything like that. We've had some issues with that we're working on, but something very real, so that they can take those gifts, their God-given gifts, and bring them out. So even if they draw the most fantastic stick figures, at least it's real, something that's real for them to construct, because then from there also in fostering real relationships, offline relationships, because if we're not getting our intimacy, our desire for intimacy met, which is real intimacy, seeing me for me, loving me for me, between my mother and my father, then when those feelings get eroticized, I'm going to go looking for it elsewhere. But if we can go and form them in what is real and form genuine relationships between our kids and ourselves, while also being real with them, because I think that's also another weakness for a lot of parents. We want to put a face up. We want to say, we didn't do anything wrong. But this is where our homes must be homes of grace and mercy, that when we screw up, we call ourselves on it. We go to them, we ask for forgiveness, and then we're able to have real conversations there. So that and lastly, there's more than three here. Last on the point would be teach them how to make a gift of self. Okay, so from the youngest time. So if we do have young ones in the house, so for instance, like you're making pancakes, right? Teaching maybe the older sibling to let their younger siblings go first, teaching how to do first, how to do acts of service there, building those up, so that, and it becomes a normal part of progression, so that when those feelings get eroticized as they grow up, these erotic desires, and erotic desires are not bad. It's what we do with them. That's the point. They're supposed to lead us into union and communion with others in a good, healthy way. Then it becomes a normal conversation. Well, remember how you were living and serving and doing these different services there? Well, with those feelings and desires, those are good. Let's talk about them. How can you direct them towards serving that person that you're attracted to?
This is wonderful. So I'm hearing how we speak about the body, we need to be more aware of it, that we don't need to cause our children to think that there's something shameful about any part of the body, to have a certain ease in conversing with them about it, and also not to be criticizing our own body for our own sake, and also for their sake, because they're absorbing that, and I remember growing up and hearing my mom talk about how she wishes certain things were different, and I always felt sad because I'm like, oh, I wish my mom would just embrace how she is, because I knew it would give me more confidence too. And so also the importance of, in the home, really having quality, real interaction, face to face, outdoors in the beauty of nature, and yeah, not getting lost in so much virtual exposure. And I also, sometimes I wonder, like, once upon a time, before everyone was bombarded with images of beautiful people all the time, you fell in love with the guy or the girl you sat next to in school and you grew up with in your small town. And you didn't even know there were so many other options as far as, body types and how people look and whatnot. And sometimes I wish it was more simple that way. But I think, like you said, there's great things about technology, but we have to be aware of how much they're in our lives and influencing us. And then the last thing that you added in was, can you remind me?
About being gift, about the different ways in which we are gifts.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think, a friend of mine, you probably know, Jacqueline Ruley, and I interviewed her in the Forming the Future series.
She's wonderful.
Yeah, I love her. And she was telling me how she teaches her children that the body is made to love. And so whatever we're doing with our body towards our siblings, is it an act of love? We have to always be assessing whether it's helping and loving them. And I really love those points. They're very practical, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can throw another anecdote your way. So it's sort of embarrassing when you don't have good formation in this area, and then you get older and you're really trying, you want to be a good Catholic. And so, like, in my 20s, I had some friends, they were all sisters, and they grew up in a beautiful Catholic home, and their parents are just in love with each other to this day. And they really, really lived their faith and had a lot of face-to-face intimacy growing up over the years. And so, I'd make jokes or comments that sort of reflected that I did still have a pornified view of sexuality and relationships. And they'd just kind of stare at me like with a blank look, like, I don't get it. And, maybe out in the rest of the world, people would be like, oh gosh, come on, lighten up, people. Like, but inside I was like, but that's amazing that they don't even think this way. Like, it's not on their radar. Like, they're just so full and so happy, and like that doesn't attract them or excite them or make them laugh. Like, how awesome. And they're all married to wonderful, men, and they didn't take the detours that a lot of us have taken over the years in our relationships. So I know I hope I can provide for my children what you have just outlined. So,
wonderful.
yeah.
And I know what I would add also. I mean, one of the things that, going along with beauty, one of the things one of the gifts the church has is a plethora of sacred art, specifically art in which the body is exposed appropriately.
Yeah.
And remember, it's not the body that is shameful. It's not nakedness that is shameful. It is the lust that is shameful. And so if we can program our children from the earliest ages, or even now, right? Maybe we have teenagers, right, who are being exposed to pornography. Expose them to the truth of the body, and this is what brings about peace and joy. And so there's catechesis that must be involved, and in the midst of sacred art where the body is being exposed appropriately. Maria lactates. Mary is breastfeeding Jesus openly. So what is that saying about this? It's saying about the body. The body is, like, as you just said, as Jacqueline Ruley had spoken about, the body is for love. And yes, I have definitely used that in timeoutville for my kids. What is the body for when they're hitting this? When my daughter's hitting her sibling, right? This is a very thing. The body is for love, and so she is making a gift of herself that is not about eroticism there, but it is about genuine gift of love and a total outpouring of love. If Jesus came to pour out his love for us, well, this is one way that women do. And what that does, it takes the mysteriousness out of, and this is where fantasy can fly. But when we see the body for what it is, and you see this also in some of the classical paintings that are even quote unquote secular, right, from the ancient Greeks, right? Those, a vast majority of them are not created for lustful purposes, but to reveal the glory of the human person. Now, did they have a revelation of Christianity? No, but this is where we can take what we know and marry it to that experience. And so if we can educate them on those, and this is why especially I use on the front of my book a very famous image of Titian of showing the beauty of the body. Those, if we're educating that, the scales can fall from our eyes, and then when the counterfeit is proposed to us, there's a rejection, because what's the big deal? Because I've seen the truth, and the truth always satisfies us, right? I talk about Adam and Eve all the time, that story over and over and over. I never get bored by it, but it's when I talk about what I call the septic tank, right? All the garbage that's coming from the pornified vision. I don't like talking about it, because I have to talk about it, because many people are clueless and think that's normal. We got to say it's not. Because I'm not interesting, or it gets boring, or it's sickening, because it's not truth. And we're made for truth, because we're made for love, we're made for beauty, and all those are transcendent. They go beyond our experiences. So if we can educate them on those and get them into seeing true beauty, as especially art is a great way to start, then they're going to be able to go and see the beauty of other persons, and even in their brokenness. In their own brokenness, they can see the beauty that's even found there, or in the brokenness of others, see their true beauty beyond the brokenness, and want to love and serve them.
Yeah. Amen. It also reminds me, just as an analogy, of when I started eating like really clean, healthy food.
Good for you.
Yeah. And of course, it took me getting really sick and suffering before I was willing to, look into that and make some changes. But once I did, my desires changed, and I no longer want to eat Snickers and ramen noodles. It just sounds gross to me, even though I used to really look forward to that sort of thing.
College days are over.
College was awful as far as food, but anyway, yeah. And I feel like it's analogous as far as how much the nourishing, satisfying reality of intimacy with people, and just having sacrificial love, and being able to see them as they can be and as they are, with compassion and all that. Yeah, you don't want to go back to the pornified vision.
Yeah, and I think that's the beautiful thing, is when we, first off, we always have a choice. We have a choice whether to love or to use another person. We always have a choice. The more that we go and live a self-sacrificial life, the easier it is, especially when we're in the presence of counterfeits, to reject the counterfeit and choose the good. But it works the other way. If we've been formed in vices, and we've formed in using people, and then making it all about ourselves, in the day in which we need to go in and we must choose the good, it becomes that much more difficult. And so this is why, the phrase in scripture, train a young person in the right way of righteousness, and when he gets older, he will not turn from it, right? This is the same thing here. So if we can be programmed, if pornified images are programming us in a certain way to have, for body shame and for viewing people as objects, if we can train first ourselves, and then train our young people in how to see the body for who and what the body really is, as a living revelation of the mystery of the person and of God, then that opportunity, in the midst of a culture that has lost its mind, literally, will lose its power over them. And this is the way I like to say how we get inoculated. It's not just mere fighting against lust, but we are inoculated against it. So we don't desire it, and we desire what is going to truly uplift us, and then go live our lives in a way that makes people curious. Why are you living such a beautiful life? Show me this vision that you have that I want so bad. And then we tell them about Jesus. And this is how,
Yeah.
and I think this is the way in which we reform, like the early church. They lived as these crazy lifestyles to the pagan world, but in fact they were just being as gifts, because they received a gift, they knew that they were gifts, and they lived that gift. And that is very attractive in a world where most people think that you're going to take advantage of them, or you're coming to them, treating them a certain way because you want to make a buck off them. But instead, no, I want genuine friendship from you, and I don't want anything from you, but what I have nothing to give you except the gift of grace and love.
And it reminds me of so many stories in scripture of how Jesus approached women, the woman at the well, and she was probably used to people seeing her a certain way and wanting things from her. And he really looked in a penetrating way into her heart and not with lust. And it's like it changed her entire life.
Yeah.
So
Yes. And in fact, from that, and this is the other hope, the other challenge I put on men, like, is this pursuit of a redeemed vision is so worth it that when you are, let's use the analogy, right? You're at the airport, right? You see a beautiful woman, or you see a woman that typically would attract you to move to lust. Instead of using her with your eyes, to pray for her and say, God, may you bless, affirm, and love her. Show me how to bless and affirm and love her for who she is. And to do this, we can certainly say that I've just made love to every woman in the airport, right? To make a gift of myself to every woman that I see, appropriately so. And to say this is very, very much possible.
mm-hmm. That's awesome. Before we wrap up, you mentioned, how our culture is literally losing its mind with this sort of pornified view. In your book, do you go into some detail about how it does actually affect the brain and our ability to sort of function in the real world?
Yeah, so the book's broken up into 3 parts, and the first part is really diagnosing it. And so if we're going to find an answer to the pornified culture, just like any disease, you have to properly diagnose. So chapter 2 goes into what's it doing to those in the pornified image, in the pornography industry, what it's doing to men, what it's doing to women, to marriages, to families, to children, all these different things. Chapter 3, we absolutely go into the brain science, and there's the brain science now is, if it's not irrefutable, I mean, we're very, very close to that point, because just on a secular level, and a great website I'd point everyone to is Fight the New Drug. Phenomenal research that's coming out of there. And they purposely, I know there's some Christians, and I think there's some Catholics who actually write for it, but they stay secular. They choose to, because they want to make the argument to the secular world, because a lot of Christians, a lot of Catholics know this is wrong. They don't know necessarily what to do about it. And I think that's where the value of the work that I'm doing, I'm proposing a genuine answer to this. But the science, just knowing the brain science, knowing the different chemicals that stir up in the brain, such as dopamine, norepinephrine, oxytocin, testosterone, things like this, serotonin, all of those, there's powerful chemicals in the brain. But the way in which those chemicals are stirred up in the brain in pornography use is directly in the aftermath. The same chemicals are stirred up in a healthy marital intimacy, that most important action in marriage, or very, very intimate and powerful action. But it's to a very different result. Whereas in marriage, we feel more fulfilled, more uplifted, more joyful, more desiring to work together, to get to know each other. In pornography, we feel worse about ourselves. We feel worse about the other person. The blame game comes in of ourselves, and shame and guilt, and that self-hatred, but also blaming other people. And if you wouldn't have done this to me, I wouldn't have to do this. Or you weren't this beautiful, I wouldn't have this ravenous lust. And this is what leads especially to a lot of the violence against especially women, because pornography in many cases has gone extremely violent, because if we're talking about the dopamine receptors are the pleasure centers, but there's these receptors that after they're used continuously, they shrink. And so in order to receive more of a high, we have to get into something deeper and deeper that's going to attract our attention more. And so this is where what was the quote unquote softer images, or things like this, it gets into much more harder activity that is viewed there, and then the desire to want to go and act out on this. And we're seeing this, especially we've seen in the most recent months with the Harvey Weinsteins, with the U.S. gymnastics coach who found tons and tons of child pornography on his computer. There's lots and lots of more, obviously, people we can bring up in there. But the root is they've been programmed. They've been programmed by this and those chemicals there. And once we've been programmed, it is virtually impossible to break free on our own power. But that's the point we want to say, is we cannot do this on our own power. It is through grace. But it is also about, from a brain science perspective, if neural pathways have been created, new neural pathways can be formed in the brain so that we no longer desire it. But it can't just be a brain thing. It's got to be a brain, a heart, and a vision. Right? You get that trifecta in there, then you're able to be inoculated, and it's awesome.
Well, great work. I'm so excited that your book's finally out. I know it took a little while.
Praise God. The hardest, my wife was the main editor on the book, and she said this by far was the hardest labor and delivery.
Yes. Well, tell everyone, please, how they can follow you or be in touch with you if they would like, and how can they get a copy of Redeemed Vision?
Awesome. So if you would head over to freedom-coaching.net, you can see a little bit of the work that we're doing with Freedom Coaching there. I did describe the book on the site there. My blog is there, in which I will post. I need to do more posting. Natalie, you probably write more than I do. And I also have on Twitter. I'm on Twitter and also Facebook. I think it's facebook.com/redeemed vision. Various articles I will post. And the book itself is available on Amazon. And if you'd like to get it, again, it's called Redeemed Vision, Setting the Blind Free from the Pornified Culture.
Thank you so much again.
An honor. Thank you so much for the honor of having me here today.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Until next time.